Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I'm going to start off today by discussing loneliness with you. It is a worldwide problem, and I may have mentioned it before, but I wanted to focus on it today because it is so prevalent. What would make a person lonely, and what is the difference between loneliness and depression? Well, loneliness has got a different kind of tonal feel about it than depression has. Loneliness makes you feel like you're cut off, like you have no communication with anybody. And you can be in the middle of a big city and people can be walking by you and standing around you. You don't know them, they don't know you, and you may never utter a word. You may smile at them or they may say hello, but not really a deep kind of communication. And so you feel totally alone. I suppose it's like feeling that here you are in the middle of a ball game, but only you are perceiving it. Everything is going on around you, but you can't connect with anybody. You can't connect with anything. And so you have that totally alone feeling. I wish I was doing something. I wished I had a friend here. I wished I was talking with somebody. I wished I had communication, but I don't. So it's like you're isolated, really, really isolated. Now, people are lonely everywhere. As I said before, it's a worldwide problem, so prevalent that there are some governments that have departments within the governments that are just focused on understanding where it comes from, how do you handle it, how do you help people not be lonely if they are. Depression has a different kind of quality about it. You do have communication, you do see people, you can talk to people, but you feel down and out. And the biggest problem with depression is, if it's a clinical depression, is that you feel that you're never going to get out of it. And feeling that you're never going to get out of it prolongs it, and it makes you feel terrible. So therefore, that is in itself its own agony. Loneliness is a little different. It's like the communication isn't even there. There is no communication. There's nothing, no one to help you. There's no one to talk to. There's no one to share anything with. And that's a very, very terrible feeling. People can be lonely just on weekends. If they're active and busy during the day and they see people and they're talking and they're doing their jobs, well, that's fine. But when weekends come, where there's nobody around, if they're single, they don't have a pet, they don't have anybody, and so they will be lonely over a weekend. And then when they start working and interchanging with people again on a work day, then they're all right again. So it is a difficult problem. Now, how can you help to solve the problem? Well, because it's such a worldwide problem and governments are interested in helping people to get over it, various devices and various ways of communication are studied so that you can get over the loneliness that you feel. I'm interested in the electronic methods. I don't think it's the best way to get over loneliness. I think human relationship is always the best, and this is what we crave and this is what we should have. But the electronics people have started building things, electronic things that you can have conversations with. Supposing you're elderly, you're alone, you don't drive, you don't have a lot of friends in your apartment or wherever it is that you're living, and so therefore you feel like you're cut off and totally alone. You may go outside, you may do your shopping, you may hire a taxi or something and do your shopping, but when you come back to an empty house. You feel empty, the house feels empty. There's no one to talk to. No one says, "Hi, I'm glad you're back," or anything like that. There's no communication. I think the whole key to stopping loneliness is to have a way of communication so that people don't feel alone. So the people who devise computers, they have devised an electronic device that can talk to you. Now, I've never seen it. I don't know what it looks like. But it probably is designed to look like a pet or maybe a human or have a human quality about it. But when you set it in operation, it'll talk to you and you can talk to it. Now, what they have found out is that people who are alone, they go out, they do their shopping, they go for a walk, whatever it is that they want to do. When they come back, they can say, "Hi, I'm back," and it'll respond, "Oh, I'm glad you're back." Now, what it does is it picks up certain elements of your conversation and responds to it. I've seen it done before a few years ago with a computer. When you said certain words, then the computer responded in a human-like voice, and it continued a conversation with you. Now, the problem is sometimes with the conversations, it gets repeated. You know, certain words get repeated over and over again. So it's like you're talking in a cycle. You talk so long, and then it tends to repeat what you said before. But it is communication, and I imagine now, years later, it's much, much better. I imagine now that it's much more sophisticated. So a person can go out, they can come back, and they can start talking to this device, whatever it looks like. I'd love to see it because I'd like to know what it looks like. And it responds. And you can have a regular conversation. This is just an aside, but I know there are apps that are being devised that will cut off nuisance calls from you. You know, these robocalls that you get, and you're advertising, it's advertising, or they're asking you to give money for something, and then you get disgusted and they won't leave the phone. They have devised an app that will intercept all of these robocalls and will stop talking to the person on the other end who initiated the call, and they can talk and talk and talk. Now, it does not reveal any information about you at all, does not mention your name, but it keeps the conversation going. And the longest that I heard of that it could keep the conversation going was like an hour and a half. Revealing nothing about you, but just deflecting whatever the questions were and having general conversation. And I don't know if the person who initiated the call is even aware of the fact that that call was answered by a computer to divert them from actually reaching you. So progress is being made in that regard. And so also you can imagine the progress is being made by these devices that will talk to you. They'll have conversations with you, and they're electronic. But what they have found out, which is interesting, is that the people who have these devices feel a lot less lonely. They feel a lot less lonely, and they're much, much happier than they were before. It's like there's something to talk to. There is something. It feels human, and even though they know, of course, that this is not a human device, it actually simulates it well enough that it takes a lot of the loneliness away. Now, I'm interested in that because when you consider how many people are living in cities and they don't have families, how many children are estranged from their parents, how many people are in the service so they don't get to see their wives, they don't get to see their husbands, how can you keep contact, and how do you feel that you can keep contact? Skype, I think, is a real help because you can see the person that you're talking to, so it's like a video conference call. But when you are totally alone, and you feel totally alone, and you don't have anyone else to communicate with, there is communication with this device, and it feels and acts like it's human communication. No arguing, nothing that's negative about it, and the person feels like they have a friend waiting for them at home, and they can actually talk to them, and the machine responds. So I would like to see how far this can get. Maybe it's a little bit like artificial intelligence. It just responds like that. So loneliness, if you are a lonely person and you are having problems with loneliness, you need to reach out to somebody. You need to join a club. You need to join a church. You need to go to some functions where people will be interested in you, and you have some kind of a social community that you can interact with. That will be the best way in order to prevent isolationism. But there are so many people that are ill they can't get out, or if they do get out, there's no one to come home to. And so I saw on television, it was like there was a flood or a fire or something, and an elderly lady showed up with her dog to a shelter. And she seemed quite happy, and she had her dog with her, and she said, it's just him and me. There's nobody else. And she seemed like a very nice person. And I said, well, that poor lady doesn't have any way to communicate with anyone unless she's in an emergency situation, and she goes to a shelter. She says, all I have is my dog. And I'm just wondering how many people who are single only have their pets. They don't have anything else. And their pets are the only ones that they communicate with. I think that it's important that they have human conversation. And I think pets are wonderful. I love pets too. But you can't really talk to them. They may know how you feel, and you may know how they feel, because I think there is a communication between animals and people, especially pets. And once you have a pet, you know some things about them. You know what makes them happy. You know the expressions of happiness or wanting to go out or whatever the expressions are. They can communicate in a certain kind of way. But you need to have a way of speaking, and a person speaking back to you, which an animal, of course, cannot do. And I think the electronic device is probably the device of the future that is also prevalent today, at least in certain communities, so people can get what they need for help for communication. I predict, though, that as time goes on, where people are trying to respond to their tablets and to their computers, they spend all day, but you know, you can spend all day with your computer, but your computer is not really your friend. It's an electronic device. This specific electronic device talks to you like it is a human being. So I think this is something we have to focus on in terms of mental health. It has become a mental health issue for so many people to be so lonely all the time and have absolutely nobody to talk with, and this device will kind of help that. And I just want to bring that to your attention. Now I'm going to go on into worry. We've been talking about panic. We've been talking about anxiety. We've been talking about the stresses of life and how you cope with them. I want to talk to you about worry, because this is very prevalent. And when you worry, you start to like turning on a switch. And it gets worse and worse, and it gets more and more intense. And the more you think about a problem, the more you worry about the problem, the more you think the problem is catastrophic. That little bump on your finger has to be cancer. It can't be a wart. It has to be cancer. And then you bring in all kinds of things. Well, you've been tired lately. Maybe it's because you've got cancer. You haven't felt good recently. Maybe it's because you've got cancer. Maybe there's this unknown thing growing in your body and you don't know anything about it. Maybe you have cancer. When you start to worry, it's like you have an on switch but no off switch. It keeps on going and going and going, and it gets worse with time, and it gets more prevalent with time, and you get worried more and more until finally it can be really detrimental to your health, because all you're thinking about is the thing that you're worried about. Now, this is something that you have to deal with, because you don't want to spend your days worrying, but you expect the whole thing to collapse. You expect things to be terrible. You expect things to be no good. And if you hear yourself talking about that, you are actually using self-talk. Self-talk is how you talk to yourself as if you were somebody else talking to yourself. And it can be very helpful. I've used self-talk in therapy, and in terms of talking to yourself as if you were the therapist. What would a therapist say to you? What would an encourager say to you? What would a first responder say to you? And you can use it in a sense to help yourself out of depression. Sometimes it works fairly well. And if you are trained a little bit to use it, it doesn't take much training. But you also use self-talk in a very detrimental way. What you'll do is you'll say things like, well, I never get a break. No one ever cares for me. Everything that goes wrong is going to happen to me. I can't expect anything good to happen to me, because everything is always bad. I knew a person once, and this poor person talked negatively about society all the time. You couldn't get her off from it. The world is just terrible. Everything bad happens. No one can catch a break. Everything is awful, and the world is failing, and we're going to get worse and worse, and we're going to have worse money problems, and we're going to have worse social problems, and the drug problem is going to get worse, and this and that and the other, and there's no end to it. When you start talking to yourself like that, in reference to yourself. You may not realize it, but you are using self-talk against yourself. And when you do that, you are making some assumptions about yourself that are very negative assumptions that you can't handle it. Now, you assume certain things about yourself, certain traits, certain characteristics when you use self-talk against yourself. And if you're kind of a person and you're negative in certain ways, and you keep talking to yourself in a negative fashion, I don't know, I can't get a break, I can't get a good job, I can't get promoted, this, that, and the other, and you never expect anything good to happen to yourself, and you talk about it, you bring on all that negativity to yourself. So what are you assuming? You're assuming that you're not going to be good enough. What you're doing is you're putting yourself in a negative state, and so therefore you are assuming that you will never get any kind of a break. You'll never get a good job. Why? Because you're not worthy. If I sat all day and told myself what a terrible person I was, because I'll never be this or that or the other. I mean, I don't care. It's not a problem with me. But just supposing I had a problem, supposing I spent all day as a single person in her 80s, and I am in my 80s now, and I kept saying, I don't know, all these younger people have all the breaks, but I don't get any breaks. What is it with this world? We don't appreciate the elderly people. We don't appreciate everything they've done. I never expect to be what I want to be. No one cares about me. Why would they care about me? I'm in my 80s. So what have I told myself? And I don't feel that way, by the way. I have a lot of friends. But what have I told myself? I told myself that when you get to be elderly, you are not worthy to have friends, to meet people, to go anywhere with your career. You're not worthy of it. Why? Because you're in your 80s. So doggone it, I'm in my 80s and now I'm worthless. That's what you're telling yourself. You have to take and think of what happens to you when you talk negatively to yourself. It is a form of self-talk. It does promote worry. And there's nothing positive that ever comes out of this. I know that I was a patient of a doctor for over 20 years, and I had a bad back injury, and I went to see the doctor 3 times a week in the beginning for treatment, and then we worked down gradually to once a week. Well, there's an elderly man, probably younger than I was, but he was there once a week too. I was the first patient in because the doctor set it up that way. He got mad. I can never be first. Why can't I be first? It's my turn to be first. I want to be first. And every time I went for my weekly appointment, I heard him grumbling about the fact that I was first, and he wanted to be first. Now, he didn't have any pain. He was retired. There was nothing really wrong with him. He went in for treatments just to kind of keep up so that he wouldn't have anything wrong with him, and that was fine. He was just using a kind of medicine as a way of making sure that he stayed healthy. Nothing wrong with that. I had a lot of serious pain from this back injury, and the doctor wanted to see me first, so he would see me first. And as I'm walking by, I want to be first. I want to be first. Why can't I be first? He finally got so angry, and it was in the fall. He took his jacket off, he rolled it up in a ball, and he threw it at the receptionist, yelling, I want to be first. I want to be first. Why can't I be first? Now, you see, if you're thinking negatively, he was probably thinking, I have no chance of ever being first. This is kind of a ridiculous example, but that's what happened. It's an absolutely true story. Well, by that point, he missed the receptionist. He didn't hit her, but he came close. I finally had to speak to the doctor about it because this was getting out of hand. So I said to the doctor, you know, he wants to be first and he's angry because he's not first. I don't care if you want to see him first. That's all right with me. And but I don't like the fact that he's throwing things at the receptionist and getting angry about it. And so later on, I think the doctor just dismissed him. He said, I will have a talk with him. And if he's not happy being second, he can find another doctor because I'm still going to see you first. But what happens is he talked himself into a negative situation. He thought it was negative. He wouldn't stand a chance of being first. But people do this all the time. This may be kind of a silly example, but people do it all the time. And so when you think about yourself in a negative way, what you're saying is, I am not worthy to be first. I don't have the skills to be first. Nobody likes me enough for me to be first. And you have put yourself into a negative self-concept. And remember, a self-concept is not what you think about yourself. It's also what you think other people think of you. People miss that point. They think, oh, self-concept is how you feel about yourself. But it's more people, how you think other people think about you. I'm a happy person because people like me. I'm an unhappy person because people don't like me. And so it goes like that. It's not just how you feel about yourself, it's how you think other people think about you. It's really kind of a combination of the two. So you can't, and I'm going to have to bring it to a close because we're almost finished, but I'm definitely going to continue with this next time. You need to understand that negative self-concept can be at the heart of some of your worry, because if you're starting to worry about something or you're starting to become fearful of something, what you're doing is saying to yourself, I can't do this. I will never be able to do this. This is not going to turn out well. It's going to be all my fault. People are going to blame me for not being smart enough. People are going to blame me for this, that, and the other. And you've already said, in a kind of roundabout way, you've already said, I'm not good enough, I'll never be good enough, and you have injured your own self-concept by talking negatively about yourself when nobody else has even given it a thought. So I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with this next time, because I want to go into the assumptions that you have about yourself if you tend to be a negative person and you don't fight this off. You really need to be able to fight this off. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.